but it does have a lot of cleavage in it. So there's a balance. If it comes up, that would be ordered. Oh. No cleavage yet. Where should be text on that slide? There it is. Hooray. All right, I'll start with a question. The question is, what sort of man is Sherlock Holmes? He's a lot of men. Is he immaculately clean, rough and gritty, man with Asperger's, bipolar disorder, chronic depression, a sociopath, a patriot, a cynic, a drunk, an addict, a misogynist, polite, caustic, boisterous, repressed, gay? If you're an informed moviegoer, you know that he's all of these things, even those that contradict one another and many more besides. We generally consider that as a piece of art, a film is something to look at. However, Sherlock Holmes has been committed to celluloid so often and in so many different ways that films featuring him are more than art. They're actually windows, not something just to look at, if you will, but something to look through, to see both a reflection of yourself back at you and also a glimpse of society that lies beyond. An isolated film, or even a work that has been adapted a few times, is interesting to analyze, but is much less adept than Sherlock Holmes adaptations at serving as a tool for scrutinizing culture and society. Because the character settings and stories have been filmed and refilmed so often, there are very few readings that the text now rejects. In addition, the sheer volume of Holmes films means that one can peer through this marvelous window to essentially any point in the last century, and this textual elasticity and pervasiveness provide excellent groundwork for the comparative analysis of embedded socio-cultural commentary within each film. As each filmmaker provides an adjusted reading of Holmes in his world in order to suit an agenda, or really more often in order to assimilate the character to some degree into the socio-cultural context of the audience, the films become more indicative of the time in which they were made than they do of Holmes himself. My larger aim in studying Sherlock Holmes films, both here and in my larger doctoral work, has less to do with shedding light on Holmes and more to do with allowing him, like Watson, to be a conductor of light. The light could be focused on any number of subjects. We could compare the hyper-patriotism in the Rathbone Bruce films from Universal to the psychosomatically hobbled John Watson of BBC's Sherlock, who essentially has post-traumatic stress disorder until Sherlock gets a hold of him and tells him that he doesn't really need his cane. And that could tell us how our engagement with war has shifted over the last 60 years. Or we could, as one of my articles does, line up several screen Holmeses and consider how our cultural definition of hero has changed over the years by comparing them to one another. This paper is going to focus on the presentation of women. One of the most frequently noted characteristics of Sherlock Holmes is his apparent misogyny. I'm not really going to be concerned with whether or not Holmes was a misogynist here. I think that's an argument best left to the Baker Street Journal. I'll let you guys take care of that. I'm instead going to address how comparing the way women are shown on screen and how Holmes interacts with them in one adaptation, comparing that against how he's shown and how women are shown against another adaptation, illustrates that beyond mere entertainment, Sherlock Holmes adaptations have a unique ability to provide an enlightening method for examining the historical moment into which the films were released. The vast catalog of Sherlock Holmes films provides a tailor-made comparison for analyzing the effect of second-wave feminism on the presentation of women and of Holmes' attitude toward women on screen. A Study in Terror was released in 1965, just as the second-wave feminist movement was beginning. Murder by Decree was released in 1979 as the movement was winding down. The films share a similar plotline, as I'm sure you know. They both pit Holmes against Jack the Ripper, and therefore also share specific settings and ancillary characters. Both necessarily provide ample screen time to women. To offer context for this textual analysis, I'd like to start by providing a very brief background on the second-wave feminist movement. I'm not a scholar of second-wave feminism, so if anybody out there is, and I don't doubt it, please forgive me if I breeze over rather a lot. The beginning of the movement is generally marked with the publication of Betty Friedan's The Feminine Mystique in 1963. Friedan identified the feminine mystique as a major hurdle toward equality for women. It says, the highest value and the only commitment for women is the fulfillment of their own femininity. The root of women's troubles in the past is that women envied men. Women tried to be like men instead of accepting their own nature, which can find fulfillment only in sexual passivity, male domination, and nurturing maternal love. Oh dear. By addressing this crisis in identity, Friedan brings a dichotomy between the public image of women, the feminine woman, socially defined by her relationship to men, and the private image of woman, that is the truth of who she is in and of herself, to light. In showing that the battles fought at the turn of the century by pioneering feminists were not over and that women's progress toward equality had since been arrested, Friedan invigorated the feminist discourse again. Consequently, the ambitions of second-wave feminism were rooted in a struggle largely based on image, film, image, you see why this works, socially imposed and personally defined images. It's a short leap from this simplified understanding of second-wave feminism to the foundations of feminist film theory. And again, I'm going to breeze over it, so if any of you are feminist film theorists, you can forgive me also. In particular, I'm going to focus on Laura Mulvey and her seminal Visual Pleasure and Narrative Cinema, which was published first in 1975. Mulvey argues that in exploiting the pleasure of looking, women are subordinated as passive and erotic objects where, quote, the determining male gaze projects its fantasy onto the female figure, which is styled accordingly. To Mulvey, film itself is patriarchal, and the exercise of dissecting an individual film to determine its relative level of enlightenment on feminist issues would be futile. However, I take a little bit of exception to Mulvey. I think where Holmes is concerned, comparative analysis allows us to address the unique quality of culturally influenced remediation of a specific and predefined character, that is Holmes himself, and specific and predefined world that he inhabits. By considering the degree to which Study in Terror and Murder by Decree each conform to or reject the eroticized and objectified image of woman, and the degree to which each addresses specific qualities of second-wave feminism, such as the notion of sisterhood, we can attempt to catalog the relative permeation of the message of second-wave feminism into society itself. Dissecting a Study in Terror through the lens of feminist film theory is quite revealing. It conforms so neatly to Mulvey's criticisms that it occasionally begins to feel more like Carry On Sherlock than serious adaptation. The film is unremarkable for John Neville's portrayal of Sherlock Holmes, which, as Jeff pointed out yesterday, is relatively bland and straightforward. We should remember, though, when we're studying adaptation, that it's the elements of an adaptation that fail to conform to our expectations that are the most suggestive, because they force us to ask, why make a change, and why make this particular change? The remarkable element of A Study in Terror is certainly its portrayal of women. As feminist film theorist Molly Haskell asserts, a film is a rich field for the defining of female stereotypes. I told you, I promised. I'm getting there. If we see stereotypes in film, it is because stereotypes existed in society, so we should begin our investigation there. The first avenue for exploring the way women are imagined in screen in A Study in Terror is how they compare to realistic expectations for women of their period and social class. As you can imagine, not so well. In 1888, Whitechapel, the location of the Ripper murders, it was a den of vice. More importantly, it was a gritty, filthy home to destitute men and women who lived in squalor, or worse, on the streets. When the opening credits to the film have finished rolling, the viewers are introduced to the Angel and Crown, a local Whitechapel public house that is the center of much of the film's action. The diegetic sound is a rousing chorus of Ta-ra-ra boom-die, sung by a cheeky and beautiful female singer. As the camera moves through the room, dozens of women, clearly prostitutes, are attempting to find and win customers for the night. They are clean women, magnificent and attractive. Their dresses appear expensive and new, their hair looks washed and artfully arranged. None look ill or terribly old or bitter. In fact, they all seem to be having a splendid time, as you would if you were a prostitute in Whitechapel in 1888. In fact, Whitechapel in 1888 had the worst slums in London, and 1,200 prostitutes are estimated to have been operating there in that year. I need hardly say that a wide selection of young, healthy, clean, well-appointed ladies of the evening would not have been giddily plying their trade in a local pub in such a notorious rookery. Mostly I wanted to say rookery in this presentation. To offer an illustration, I want you to consider Annie Chapman, Jack the Ripper's second victim. Chapman was 48 at the time of her murder. She'd been living on the streets and in common lodging houses in Whitechapel for at least 2 years. The lodging houses, of which there were over 200 in the district at the time, were ghastly places, where a double bed for the night could be purchased for 8p, but who had 8p? A single could be purchased for 4, but nobody had that really. But for 2p, you could stand along the wall and sleep perched against a rope strung across the room to hold you upright. Annie Chapman didn't even have enough money for this, so on the night of her murder, she was on the streets. An illustration in the Police News from September 22, 1888, shows Chapman to be chubby and homely. In A Study in Terror, Annie Chapman is played by a flouncing 28-year-old Barbara Windsor, which doesn't really add up all that well. Barbara Windsor at the time, of course, was known for her cheeky sex appeal in the Carry On franchise. This is a strong and revealing intertextual comment here. They're trying to bring in Barbara Windsor's audience by showing her with rather a lot of cleavage, and she looks very clean and happy there because she's just got a new bonnet. But she's about to be murdered horribly, so oh well. The prostitutes in A Study in Terror defy historical expectation. In other words, we should therefore question why they've been rendered the way they are, apart from everybody wanting to see Barbara Windsor's cleavage. They're both objectified by the male gaze through the camera lens, and they're eroticized in precisely the manner identified by Mulvey. Before the credits even begin, a mere 20 seconds into the film, the camera pauses on a beautiful, sexy woman and spends 15 seconds, and that is an eternity on screen, panning from her feet up her body, finally coming to rest on a medium close-up, including her face and bust. Mulvey points out that the presence of woman is an indispensable element of spectacle in normal narrative film. Yet her visual presence tends to work against the development of a storyline, to freeze the flow of action in moments of erotic contemplation. The impetus of the entire story is the murders of the 5 women, Polly Nichols, Annie Chapman, Elizabeth Stride, Catherine Eddowes, and Mary Kelly. The murders themselves, however, receive little or no screen time. Instead, viewers are treated to each woman in turn attempting to secure the Ripper as a customer. The camera never lights on him, leaving him out of shot, but instead pauses the narrative for what Mulvey rightly calls erotic contemplation of the women as objects of sexual interest. This male gaze is translated into a loss of rightful victimhood for the women. As the focus is not on their murders, but on the exercise of their professions, viewers are subtly encouraged to judge the women rather than the killer. Prostitution certainly falls far outside the acceptable domestic realm for women that Friedan set out to combat. We should therefore not be surprised that a film made in 1965 should present the murder of prostitutes in a manner that suggests that to the degree that women were neglecting their proper sphere, they deserved their fates. In the case of Mary Kelly, she wantonly leads out of her window and tosses her house key down to her murderer, at which point the viewer is treated to what amounts to a nearly 2-minute-long striptease before being denied any real glimpse of the horror of the woman's fate. The meaning is clear. Mary Kelly was asking for it. The brutality of Kelly's murder is preserved for history in a police photograph of the scene, but viewers of A Study in Terror are insulated from this brutality as neither the camera nor even Holmes himself enters the scene of the murder. Only a short exchange hints at the truth. Holmes spots Lestrade and exiting the chamber and asks, "Lestrade, are you not well?" Lestrade answers, "You've never seen anything of it, anything like it this side of hell." And if you're squeamish, I'm sorry about this. Indeed, Holmes doesn't see it at all, as he leaves immediately, telling Watson that there is a more important examination he must make. Mary Kelly's fate is thus robbed of any significance at all. When Holmes chooses to ignore the scene of Mary Kelly's death, he's illustrating the manner in which the film privileges the solution of the case over the women involved. This was even clearer in his reaction to an earlier murder. Holmes hears screaming and runs to the scene. When given the option of rushing in to see whether the victim can be helped or chasing the killer, Holmes chooses the latter. Throughout the film, he is largely aloof, maintains a professional distance from the case. The emotion he shows most readily is a pleasure at having work to occupy his mind, which is certainly not inconsistent with Conan Doyle. He's unconcerned with the cruelty inherent in the sex trade, commenting at one point to the owner of a pub-cum-body house, "The way you make your money is of no interest to me." Once the case has been solved, Holmes's interest in it ends. At the conclusion of the film, in order to cement Holmes's lack of concern, a parcel is delivered containing a hat that Holmes gleefully jumps into the string of deductions about Henry Baker from the Blue Carbuncle over the hat. And you can see how just joyful he is after this horrible situation is past. The sexualization of the characters and situations in A Study in Terror is actually quite alarming. In Feminism, Femininity, and Popular Culture, Joanne Hollow points out that as a projection of male values, films of the 1960s responded to women's demands for equality with a backlash. Cinema became both more violent towards women and truly monolithic in its sexism. In failing to acknowledge the truth of sexual violence through the camera while presenting such a giggling schoolboy attitude toward prostitution, A Study in Terror reveals itself as a fundamentally sexist text. We should move on now and examine if murder by decree represents any kind of consciousness raising in relation to the aims of second-wave feminism. By 1979, when the film was released, second-wave feminism had largely run its course. While it had not succeeded in earning gender equality for women, it had at least foregrounded gender discrimination and publicly challenged the image of woman as passive and submissive. Murder by Decree is not a fully enlightened text by any means, but it certainly illustrates a positive step forward from the sexism in A Study in Terror. The aesthetics of Murder by Decree are grittier. The women correspond much more closely to the realistic expectations for East End prostitutes. The first victim, Polly Nichols, is seen only briefly. In contrast to the long, lingering pre-credit shot of the character in A Study in Terror, here Nichols is visible for a mere 2 seconds before her murder. I know that's very dark, but the whole aesthetic of the film is very dark, so sorry about that. She is strangled in close-up on camera, and she appears entirely unglamorous, as you can see. She wears tatted clothes, she has no makeup on, she has terrible teeth, and she even has visible sores on her mouth. Other women in the film are similarly appointed. A major element of Murder by Decree that speaks directly to the concerns of second-wave feminism is the concept of sisterhood. According to Hollows, the concept of sisterhood is still influential in many forms of popular feminism. The emphasis on a familial bond between women acting collectively to support each other is one feature of the ways in which feminist concerns have entered into mainstream popular forms. The plot of Murder by Decree foregrounds the relationships between the victims. As Holmes recounts the events leading to the Ripper murders, the camera flashes back to a shot of the women huddled together in mutual fear, concern, and solidarity. This depiction of sisterhood was a result of the growing awareness of a common sense of powerlessness among women that was one of the major triumphs of second-wave feminism. It slots effortlessly into Murder by Decree because, as Hollow points out, the idea became part of the conversation about women thanks to the feminist discourse of the previous decade and a half. Murder by Decree also resisted a temptation to eroticize the sex trade. Instead, it focused on the pathetic nature of the women driven into their profession. This is best illustrated through an exchange that Watson has with a prostitute who is eager to secure him as a customer, which is a hilarious scene, and I'm going to get into my best East End prostitute voice here. The others are cheap tots. They're jealous because I'm young and I get older blokes. Got all my own teeth, that's why. What do you want with Mary Kelly anyway? Her teeth's falling out too, not like mine. Have a feel. Oh God. Oh bloody hell. Just one loose. Bloody hell. She adjusts herself into what she imagines is a provocative pose, but her concern for her loose tooth merely renders her wretched and grotesque. In addition, the erotic elements of the act of prostitution are balanced by the presentation of the women as innocent and ill-used. Though Mulvey would doubtless disagree that the camera and its male gaze can be reformed, I believe there is evidence of some reformation in Murder by Decree through 2 separate techniques. The first is the interruption of the camera's natural tendency toward objectification through barriers and shadows. While shots were composed in such a way as to expose and well light the women in A Study in Terror, particularly their cleavage, as promised, in Murder by Decree, the women are often shot through windows in bars, inside enclosed spaces, and in dim lighting. This has a distancing effect, disrupts the pleasure of looking that is foundational to Mulvey's criticisms. The second technique evident in Murder by Decree that undermines the male gaze is the reversal of the camera's perspective. Laura Mulvey identifies 3 looks associated with cinema: the camera's look, the audience's look, and the looks between characters on screen. She argues that the conventions of narrative film deny the first 2 and subordinate them to the third, the conscious aim being always to eliminate intrusive camera presence and prevent a distancing awareness in the audience. Murder by Decree does not follow this traditional model throughout. In those moments in which the only look that exists within the film is the Ripper searching for a victim, the camera turns its look back into an extreme close-up of his eyes. This is decidedly the camera's look rather than any character's, and therefore undermines the passive receptive pleasure that Mulvey notes as a culprit in the traditional patriarchal art of cinema, which is one reason it's such a jarring moment for viewers. It also visually links the act of looking at women with Jack the Ripper and therefore identifies the male gaze as dangerous. Unlike in A Study in Terror, the Sherlock Holmes of Murder by Decree defies expectations. He's highly expressive and deeply receptive to the emotions of women, and we should question why he has been reimagined this way. His behavior is consistently emotionally driven. It's best illustrated by 2 scenes. The first is his visit with the character Annie Crook. He finds her in an asylum, and through gentle, tender behavior, he induces her to speak for the first time in 6 months. He tells Watson that we must take this woman from this hellish place. But he's denied. Rather than make an argument based on evidence, as we might expect Holmes to do, no, he savagely attacks the attending physician. who he later passionately decries for prescribing eternal incarceration simply because Crook was seduced, made pregnant, and delivered of a child. When that fails, he turns helplessly to the woman, and the camera lingers on his haunted face as he weeps openly. This is hardly the Holmes of Conan Doyle, but it is certainly a man with an enlightened post-second wave attitude toward the plight of misused women. The other and perhaps most revealing scene in the film for this new gender-aware Holmes is his confrontation with the Prime Minister, Home Secretary, and ex-Chief of Police. In an impassioned speech, he takes them to task for their callous preference of the reputation of the Duke of Clarence over the lives of the disenfranchised prostitutes of Whitechapel. And he dejectedly finishes by saying, "I will always have the death of Mary Kelly on my conscience, and you, Prime Minister, will have the deaths of Annie and all those tragic women and their agony on yours." The film ends by illustrating Holmes's latent conscience through a melancholy tune scratched out on his violin. Rather than being enticed by the thrill of the chase, Holmes is here drawn by the human element of the case. His motivation lies in the women and their circumstances, and his final speech is a class-conscious, gender-aware diatribe that would have seemed preposterous from the mouth of John Neville in A Study in Terror only 14 years earlier. Although Murder by Decree does not fight every battle of second-wave feminism, the value of motherhood, for instance, as the epitome of womanhood is still championed through the plot, but it does overcome many of the sexist characteristics of A Study in Terror. The aesthetics, the patriarchal attributes of the camera, and Holmes's nature are all altered to create a more enlightened text. I don't argue that these are conscious changes. In fact, they're all the more revealing because they're largely unconscious. They reflect a fundamental change in attitudes toward women between 1965 and 1979, and reveal almost nothing about Conan Doyle or Whitechapel in 1888. It's a testament to the continuity and elasticity of Sherlock Holmes that two such similar films can present such disparate notions of gender. The more Holmes is adapted, the more readings he will receive, and the fewer he will have the capacity to reject. Sociologists and scholars of culture studies have a valuable ally in Sherlock Holmes, who can, by virtue of his ubiquitous screen presence, provide incredible insight into ever-shifting ideologies, not just on gender, but on any number of sociocultural phenomena. He is an ideal window, and through his hundreds of cinematic outings, Sherlock Holmes has justified his ability to be all things to all people.